The desert wind howled through the cracked windows of the old bakery, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and distant rain. In the dim glow of a single bulb swinging like a pendulum, Old Man Harlan wiped flour from his calloused hands, his eyes heavy with the weight of another sleepless night. At 72, Harlan had baked his way through decades of solitude, each loaf a silent testament to promises he'd made long ago, to his late wife, to the son he'd lost in a war overseas, and to the strangers who passed through this forgotten stretch of highway. But tonight, as thunder rumbled on the horizon, something shattered the quiet. The sharp crack of splintering wood from the front door, followed by the low growl of engines idling just beyond. Harlan froze, his heart pounding like the dough he'd kneaded earlier. Shadows loomed in the doorway, 3 burly figures in cheap suits, reeking of cigarette smoke and entitlement. They weren't locals. They were the kind of men who wore badges like shields for their greed. Enforcers from the county office who'd been circling his property for weeks. "Time's up, old-timer," the leader snarled, his voice gravelly and impatient. "This land's slated for development. That new casino's gonna swallow your little shack whole. Sign the papers, or we'll make it official." Harlan's hands trembled as he clutched the edge of the counter, memories flooding back. The day he'd buried his boy, the promise whispered over a fresh-baked loaf to keep this place alive, a beacon for the weary. But now, with eviction looming and debts piling like unsold bread, indignation burned in his chest. These men weren't just taking his home, they were erasing the last thread of his honor. Before Harlan could muster a response, the night erupted into chaos. A child's cry pierced the air from the alley behind the bakery. A small girl, no more than 8, huddled against the wall, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She'd wandered too far from the trailer park down the road, lost in the storm, and now she stared wide-eyed at the intruders, her tiny frame shaking. The men laughed, one stepping forward to shoo her away like a stray dog. "Beat it, kid. This ain't a playground." Harlan's blood boiled. He moved instinctively, grabbing a rolling pin. But he was no fighter anymore, just a broken man with a code. That's when the rumble started, a deep, thunderous vibration that shook the ground like an earthquake. Headlights pierced the darkness, slicing through the rain-slicked street like knives. A convoy of motorcycles crested the hill, their chrome gleaming under the flickering street lamp, engines roaring in unison. At the lead was Jax, a weathered biker with a salt and pepper beard and scars that mapped a life of hard roads. His crew, the Iron Vipers, numbered 24 strong, leather-clad guardians of forgotten oaths, men and women who'd found family in the saddle after wars and betrayals left them adrift. Jax cut his engine first, the silence sudden and heavy as the pack formed a wall of steel and resolve behind him. The intruders spun, their bravado crumbling. "What the hell is this?" The leader barked, but Jax dismounted with deliberate calm, his boots crunching on the gravel. Rain dripped from his bandana, tracing lines down his weathered face. He'd ridden this route for years, always stopping at Harlan's for the warm loaves left out front. No questions, no payment, just bread steaming in the dawn light. It was a ritual born of quiet respect, a nod to the old man's unspoken generosity. "You boys picking on bakers and kids now?" Jax's voice was low, laced with the steel of someone who'd stared down worse than county crooks. His eyes flicked to the girl, who edged toward Harlan, and then back to the men. "This town's got enough shadows without you casting more." The leader puffed up, flashing a badge. "Official business. This man's land is ours by right." But Jax's crew shifted, a subtle menace in their stance, hands on handlebars, eyes unblinking. One rider, a woman named Lena with tattoos snaking up her arms like vines, knelt beside the child, offering a gentle hand. "Hey, little one, storm's passing. You're safe now." The girl's sobs quieted, her small fingers clutching Lena's jacket. Harlan watched, chest tight, as the pieces of his crumbling world began to realign. These weren't just bikers. They were echoes of the loyalty he'd lost, bound by promises as old as the highway itself. Tension coiled like a spring. The leader drew a step closer, but Jax raised a hand, his presence commanding without a shout. "We've got stories of our own," he said, voice steady. "Men like you think paper pushes people around, but Harlan here's been feeding us for years. Fresh bread when the road's cold, no strings. That's worth more than your deeds." The air thickened with the scent of wet leather and impending rain, the bakery's warm glow casting long shadows that danced like spectres. The intruders hesitated, outnumbered and outmatched in spirit if not in numbers. One by one, they backed away, muttering threats that dissolved into the night. As their car peeled out, tires screeching, the convoy exhaled, a collective breath of justice served not with fists, but with unyielding honor. Harlan sank onto a stool, the rolling pin clattering to the floor. The child, now named Mia by the soft words Lena whispered, clung to his side, her fear ebbing like the storm clouds parting overhead. Jax approached, his massive frame softened by the moment. "Heard whispers in town about your trouble," he admitted, glancing at the eviction notice crumpled on the counter. "That bread, it wasn't just food, it was a reminder of promises kept." Harlan nodded, throat tight. Years ago, after his son's death, he'd vowed to this very spot, to be a light for the lost, the riders, the wanderers. He'd forgotten how heavy that oath had grown, buried under grief and isolation. As the first rays of dawn painted the horizon in gold, the iron vipers didn't ride off. Instead, they gathered around the bakery's sagging porch, engines silent, sharing stories over the last of Harlan's loaves. Mia's mother arrived, frantic and grateful, pulling her daughter into a tearful embrace. But in that circle of strangers turned allies, something shifted. Jax leaned in, his eyes meeting Harlan's. "You've given us strength on these roads. Now let us build something back." It was a promise, unspoken yet ironclad, a vow that would bind them all, transforming a simple act of kindness into a legacy of redemption. The sun climbed higher, warming the chill air, and for the first time in years, Harlan felt the weight lift. The bakery stood not as a relic of loss, but as the heart of a new family forged in the dust and dawn. Little did he know, this intervention was just the spark. What the Vipers would construct in the days to come would rewrite his story, proving that loyalty, once kindled, burns eternal. Word count, 872. The morning sun filtered through the bakery's lace curtains, casting golden flecks across the scarred wooden counter where Harlan had spent countless dawns shaping dough. The air still hummed with the faint echo of engines, though the iron vipers had dispersed to their campsites along the highway's edge, leaving behind a quiet that felt earned rather than empty. Harlan moved slowly, his joints protesting as he pulled a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven, the sweet spice mingling with the earthy scent of cooling rain. Mia's laughter from earlier lingered in his mind, her small hands sticky with glaze as Lena had shown her how to twist the dough. For the first time since his son's flag-draped casket, the bakery felt alive, not just a tomb for memories. Jax returned just after noon, his motorcycle kicking up dust that swirled like whispered secrets. He wasn't alone. Trailing him were a half-dozen riders, including Lena, whose sharp eyes scanned the horizon as if expecting trouble. They carried toolboxes and blueprints rolled under arms, faces etched with the quiet determination of those who'd rebuilt lives from wreckage. "We talked it over," Jax said, dismounting with a nod to Harlan. His voice carried the gravel of long rides, but there was warmth in it now, like embers under ash. "That eviction ain't happening, not on our watch." Harlan paused, flour-dusted hands hovering over a loaf, his throat tightening at the sight of these strangers, tattooed, road-worn, offering what his blood family never could: unwavering alliance. They gathered around the counter, the bakery's walls seeming to lean in, absorbing their words. Lena unrolled the blueprints, her fingers tracing lines that spoke of ambition, a sturdy addition to the bakery, walls reinforced with local stone, a communal space where riders could rest, share meals, and stand as witnesses against the county's greed. "We've seen places like yours get swallowed," she explained, her voice steady, eyes flicking to the faded photo of Harlan's son pinned above the register, a young soldier with a grin that mirrored his father's. But this becomes a stronghold, a place that proves promises outlast ink on paper. Harlan's gaze lingered on the photo, the ache of loss twisting like a knife. His boy had died defending ideals these men now embodied, far from home, in sands that swallowed heroes whole. He'd vowed then to honor that sacrifice, baking bread for the lost souls who rolled through. But grief had dulled the oath, until now. As the afternoon wore on, the crew set to work outside, the rhythmic thud of hammers punctuating the air like a heartbeat. Harlan watched from the window, steam rising from fresh loaves as he placed them on the sill, a silent thank you, the way he'd always done. The scent of yeast and warmth drew the riders back in waves, their breaks filled with stories traded over crusty slices. One, a burly veteran named Marcus, with a prosthetic leg hidden under his jeans, spoke of his own shattered vows, a promise to a fallen comrade to protect the innocent, abandoned in the haze of civilian life until the road called him back. "Harlan, your bread. It's like that first meal after a long deployment, reminds you why you fight." The words hung heavy, binding them in a tapestry of shared scars, the bakery's glow turning strangers into kin. But peace was fleeting. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, headlights pierced the twilight, not the welcoming beam of allies, but the harsh glare of authority. Two county vehicles pulled up, tires crunching gravel with deliberate menace. Out stepped the same leader from the night before, flanked by a sheriff's deputy whose badge gleamed falsely under the porchlight. "Thought we'd scared you off," the leader sneered, eyeing the construction debris with disdain. "This is private property. Your little circus ends now." Jack stepped forward from the shadows, his crew materializing like ghosts from the lengthening dusk. Lena at his side, Marcus gripping a wrench like an extension of his resolve. The air thickened with tension, the scent of cooling engines mixing with the faint, defiant aroma of baked goods. Harlan emerged, his apron streaked with flour, standing taller than he had in years. "This land's mine by right of sweat and sorrow," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The leader laughed, waving papers that rustled like dry leaves. "Rights don't mean squat against progress. Sign or we'll haul you out." But Jax's presence loomed, a wall of leather and loyalty. "Progress," he echoed, his tone laced with quiet thunder. "You mean paving over what's good for your pockets? We've got witnesses, folks who've known Harlan's kindness longer than your schemes." The deputy shifted uneasily, glancing at the growing circle of riders, their eyes reflecting the unyielding fire of oaths renewed. Words escalated into standoff, the night air buzzing with unspoken threats. Lena knelt by the bakery door, sketching a quick map on scrap paper, her voice low as she murmured to Mia's mother, who'd returned with supplies in gratitude. "This ain't just about one man," she told Harlan aside, her tattoos catching the light like veins of iron. "It's about all of us. Promises we made to the ones we lost, to be better than the corruption that chews us up." The leader blustered, but the weight of numbers and moral clarity pressed in. He retreated with a curse, tires spinning dust into the stars, leaving the crew unbroken. Under the moon's silver watch, work resumed by lantern light, beams cutting through darkness like hope. Harlan joined them, passing bread and water, his stories unfolding with each bite. Tales of his wife teaching him the oven's secrets, of letters from his son promising return. The vipers listened, their laughter and nods weaving a new bond, stronger than steel. Jax clapped a hand on Harlan's shoulder as the first wall rose, framing a future. What we build here, it's more than bricks. It's redemption for all the roads we've traveled alone. The night deepened, filled with the symphony of labor and legacy, each strike of hammer echoing the promise that loyalty, once ignited, forges empires from dust. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The dawn broke with a reluctant light, painting the bakery's new framework in hues of amber and rust, as if the desert itself approved of the labor etched into the earth. Harlan stood at the threshold, a mug of black coffee steaming in his gnarled hands, watching the iron vipers stir from their bedrolls, scattered like fallen leaves around the site. The air carried the crisp bite of morning dew mixed with the lingering warmth of yesterday's bread, a scent that now seemed woven into the very bones of this place. Jax was already up, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun as he directed Marcus in aligning a beam, the younger man's prosthetic leg sinking slightly into the soft soil, a reminder of battles fought far from this quiet stretch of road. Lena moved among them with purposeful grace, her toolkit slung over one shoulder, pausing to hand Harlan a fresh thermos. "Slept like the dead," she said with a wry smile, her voice rough from the night stories. "Your tales kept the ghosts at bay." Inside, the bakery hummed with a rhythm Harlan hadn't felt in decades, the clatter of mixing bowls as he prepared the day's batch, the soft murmur of voices from the riders who'd claimed the counterstools like old friends. Mia darted in and out, her earlier fear replaced by wide-eyed wonder, trailing Lena like a shadow. The child's mother, a weary woman named Clara, with lines etched deep from years of scraping by in the trailer park, had stayed on to help, her hands deftly rolling dough under Harlan's guidance. "Never thought I'd find kin in leather vests," Clara admitted, wiping sweat from her brow, the flour dusting her cheeks like faint stars. Harlan nodded, his eyes distant, pulled back to the photo of his son above the oven, a frozen smile that now seemed to watch over this unlikely gathering. The boy had written letters from the front, promising to return and expand the bakery into something grand, a haven for the road-weary. Grief had buried that dream, but these riders were unearthing it, brick by stubborn brick. As the sun climbed, casting long shadows that danced across the half-built addition, the crew's work took on a feverish intensity. Hammers rang out in harmony with the distant call of coyotes fading into the heat, each strike a defiance against the county's looming shadow. Jax wiped sweat from his brow, his salt and pepper beard glistening, and pulled Harlan aside to the porch steps. "We ain't just patching walls," he said, his gaze steady, tracing the horizon where thunderheads gathered like unspoken doubts. "This place, it's becoming a beacon. Folks from the highway, the park, even the old vets haul down the line. They're hearing about it. Word spreads like dust on the wind." Harlan's chest tightened. He'd always baked in silence, his generosity a private vow to honor his losses. But now, with the Viper's loyalty mirroring his son's unkept promises, he felt exposed, vulnerable to the hope stirring within. "What if they come back stronger?" he murmured, voice laced with the ache of too many defeats. Jax's hand rested on his shoulder, firm as the oaths that bound his crew. "Then we stand firmer. We've all got scars from breaking or keeping words, mine from a brother in arms left in the sand, Lena's from a family that turned their back. Your bread fed us when we were ghosts on these roads. This is payback, old man. Redemption wrapped in mortar." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of shared burdens, as Marcus called them back to the frame, his laughter booming over a near miss with a level. The group paused for lunch. Harlan's loaves passed hand to hand, crusts cracking under teeth, stories flowing like the coffee, tales of narrow escapes on blacktop, of quiet acts that mended fractured souls. In that circle, Harlan glimpsed the family he'd lost, not bound by blood, but by the unbreakable thread of honor. Yet the fragile peace shattered by midday, when a dust cloud heralded an unwelcome arrival, not the county's sleek cars, but a battered truck rumbling up the drive, its bed loaded with surveyor's gear. Out stepped a wiry man in a hard hat, clipboard in hand, flanked by two deputies whose uniforms strained against uneasy postures. The leader from before wasn't there, but his influence lingered in the man's curt nod. "Official inspection," he announced, his voice slicing through the construction din like a cold wind. "Heard you're squatting on development land. This little project's gotta stop. Permits, liens, the works." The Vipers froze, tools lowering as Jack stepped forward, his presence a bulwark of calm fury. Lena edged closer to Clara and Mia, who had scampered inside at the sight of badges, her small face pressed to the window. Harlan felt the old indignation rise, hot and unyielding as he confronted the inspector. "This is my home, built with my hands and heart. You can't just erase it for some gambler's dream." The man smirked, flipping through papers that rustled like threats. "Heart don't pay taxes, sir. We've got orders, higher up than you can imagine. Clear out or face the law." Tension crackled, the air thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and simmering resolve. Marcus gripped his hammer tighter, his prosthetic shifting with a soft creak, eyes flashing memories of authority, betrayed in distant wars. Jax raised a hand, diffusing the spark. "We've got our own records," he said evenly, nodding to Lena, who produced a folder of witness statements, accounts from locals, receipts of Harlan's quiet aid over years, even a faded letter from his son vouching the land's legacy. "This ain't squatting. It's standing ground." The inspector faltered, scanning the documents under the relentless sun, sweat beading on his brow. The deputies exchanged glances, the weight of the rider's unblinking stares, pressing like an invisible force. One murmured into a radio, voices low and urgent, as the standoff stretched, seconds ticking like a countdown. Harlan's heart raced, the bakery's warmth at his back a reminder of what hung in the balance, not just walls, but the soul of promises kept against a tide of corruption. Finally, the man snapped his clipboard shut, color draining from his face. This'll need review, but you're on thin ice." He retreated to the truck, engine coughing to life, leaving a swirl of dust that settled like a temporary truce. As the vehicle vanished into the haze, the crew exhaled, resuming work with renewed vigor. Beams hoisted higher, walls rising as if to touch the sky. Jax turned to Harlan, a spark of triumph in his eyes. "They'll push harder now, but we've got momentum. Your vows started this, ours will finish it." The afternoon blurred into a symphony of effort, laughter punctuating the strain, bonds forging tighter under the watchful eye of the fading sun. Harlan kneaded dough inside, the rhythm soothing his frayed nerves, whispering to the empty air the promise he'd renew, to feed not just bodies, but the weary spirits that sought refuge. Yet as twilight crept in, a distant rumble echoed, not thunder, but engines more than before, hinting at allies or adversaries gathering strength. The bakery's light burned brighter, a defiant glow against the encroaching night, where loyalties would be tested in ways none could yet foresee. The twilight deepened into a velvet shroud over the bakery, stars pricking the sky like distant campfires, as the rumble of engines grew from a murmur to a symphony that vibrated through the earth. Harlan paused at the oven, his hands dusted with flour that clung like forgotten snow, the warmth of rising dough, a counterpoint to the chill settling in his bones. The Iron Vipers had paused their labor, tools set aside as Jack scanned the horizon, his silhouette etched against the fading light. Lena stood beside him, her arms crossed over her leather vest, the tattoos on her skin seeming to pulse with the approaching thunder, not of storm, but of steel and resolve. Marcus leaned on his hammer, prosthetic legs steady in the gravel, his eyes narrowing at the convoy, cresting the distant rise. Not adversaries, but reinforcements, a swell of riders numbering near 40, their headlights weaving like fireflies in the dusk. Word had spread along the asphalt veins of the highway, carried by whispers in truck stops and late-night bonfires, tales of an old baker's quiet defiance, of bread shared without expectation, now repaid in the currency of brotherhood. These weren't just vipers. They were wanderers from allied packs, veterans with faded insignias on their sleeves, women who traded city lights for open roads, all drawn by the echo of oaths long dormant. Jax raised a hand in greeting as the lead bike pulled up, its rider a grizzled figure named Elias, whose face bore the map of border runs and borderless regrets. "Heard you needed hands," Elias called, dismounting with a nod to Harlan, who emerged from the bakery's glow, a tray of warm rolls balanced in his arms, the scent of cinnamon and yeast cut through the exhaust, drawing the newcomers like moths, their engines falling silent in deference. They gathered in the expanding yard, the half-built addition looming like a promise half-kept, its frame a skeleton of hope under the moon's pale scrutiny. Harlan passed the tray, watching calloused hands break bread, crumbs scattering like offerings to the night. Stories unfurled in the firelight of a hastily kindled pit, Elias speaking of a vow to a lost patrol brother, to shield the vulnerable from bureaucratic wolves, a young rider named Sophia sharing how Harlan's loaves had sustained her through a winter of eviction threats in a distant town. "Your kindness was the first light after darkness," she said, her voice soft, eyes reflecting the flames. Harlan felt the weight of their words settle over him, mingling with the ache of his own buried grief. His son's letters, tucked in a drawer behind the counter, had promised a life of building, not just baking, a legacy of shelter for the storm-tossed. These riders embodied that unfulfilled dream, their loyalty a bridge across the chasm of loss. As the night wore on, the crew divided tasks with the efficiency of those who'd forged unity in chaos. Some reinforced the walls with scavenged timber, the thud of mallets a rhythmic heartbeat. Others sketched plans for a communal hall, a space where the road-weary could find not just rest, but reckoning against injustice. Jax pulled Harlan to the porch, the older man's steps slower but surer now, fueled by the collective fire. "This ain't temporary," Jax murmured, his breath visible in the cooling air, the distant howl of wind through sagebrush underscoring his words. "We're turning this into a haven, a viper outpost, open to all who honor the code. No more lone stands." Harlan's gaze drifted to the photo inside, his boy's face a ghost in the lamplight, and he nodded, throat tight. "I promised him I'd keep the light burning, never thought it'd draw a family like this." But the fragile harmony fractured under the weight of encroaching shadows. By midnight, a sleek black SUV sliced through the darkness, its tires whispering threats on the gravel as it halted before the gate. Out stepped the county leader from that first stormy night, his cheap suit rumpled, flanked by a phalanx of deputies and a suited attorney whose briefcase gleamed like a weapon. Floodlights from the vehicle bathed the sight in harsh white, casting the riders' faces in stark relief, eyes hardened, postures unyielding. "This ends now!" the leader barked, his voice amplified by the night stillness, papers clutched like talismans, vagrants and outlaws squatting on prime land. "We've got injunctions, trespass charges. Pack up or we'll do it for you, at gunpoint if needed." The air thickened with tension, the scent of oiled leather and smouldering embers clashing against the intruder's cologne of authority. Jax stepped into the light, his crew forming a silent arc behind him, Lena's hand on Mia's shoulder inside the bakery door, Clara peering out with wide eyes, Marcus's grip white-knuckled on his tool. Harlan felt indignation surge, hot as the oven's core, propelling him forward. "This land's soaked in my sweat, my sorrows," he declared, voice carrying the gravel of years. "You peddle progress, but it's poison, swallowing homes for your greed." The attorney smirked, unfolding documents that rustled like serpents. "Greed. This is law. Your haven violates zoning, endangers public safety. Sign over the deed or face demolition at dawn." Murmurs rippled through the riders, a low growl of resolve, as Elias edged closer, his presence a reminder of battles where paper tigers fell to iron wills. The standoff stretched, seconds elongating into eternity, the floodlights flickering like uncertain stars. Jax's voice cut through, steady as sunrise. "We've got more than words. Witnesses, locals who've thrived because of Harlan's heart. You think badges scare us? We've faced worse shadows." He nodded to Sophia, who held up a phone recording the exchange, its screen glowing with evidence of the night's unity. The leader faltered, sweat beading despite the chill, his eyes darting to the swelling ranks of riders. Their bikes a fortress of chrome under the stars. One deputy shifted, radio crackling with hesitant reports, as the weight of moral clarity bore down. "This requires escalation," the attorney muttered, but the bluster had ebbed, their retreat signaled by the SUV's reversing lights, tail lights fading into the black like defeated embers. As silence reclaimed the night, the crew erupted in quiet triumph. Hugs exchanged, tools raised in salute. Harlan sank onto the steps, the tray empty now, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the dawn of possibility. Jax knelt beside him, the fire's glow warming their faces. "They'll circle back, but we're rooted now. Your bread built this bridge. Our hands will make it unbreakable." The work resumed under lantern light, laughter weaving through the labor, bonds tightening like rebar in concrete. Mia slipped out, offering Harlan a clumsy roll she'd shaped, her smile a beacon brighter than any floodlight. In that moment, the bakery transcended walls, a testament to promises reborn, where chosen family defied the corrosion of power. Yet as the first hints of false dawn tinged the east, a deeper rumble stirred on the wind, whispering of trials yet to come, where honor would demand its fiercest price. If this tale of quiet courage is stirring something in you, hit that like button below. It helps these stories of redemption reach more souls in need of light. The first blush of dawn crept over the desert like a hesitant promise, gilding the bakery's rising walls in soft rose and gold, as if the sun itself marveled at the transformation. Harlan leaned against the porch rail, the rough wood biting into his palms, inhaling the mingled scents of fresh mortar and the faint, yeasty ghost of last night's loaves. Exhaustion tugged at his eyelids, but sleep had evaded him, chased away by the night's echoes, the growl of engines, the sharp retorts of standoffs, the quiet vows exchanged around the fire. The Iron Vipers and their allies sprawled in makeshift camps, bedrolls unfurled like surrendered flags, their breaths sinking with the land's slow awakening. Jax stirred first, rising with the creak of leather and bone, his salt and pepper beard catching the light as he scanned the horizon, ever vigilant against the shadows that lingered beyond the sagebrush. Inside, the bakery pulsed with subdued life. Clara moved like a shadow at the counter, her hands, once calloused from trailer park toil, now gentle as she arranged cooling trays, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals. Mia perched on a stool, her small fingers tracing patterns in spilled flour, her earlier wide-eyed fear softened into tentative trust. Lena joined them, sliding a mug of coffee across to Harlan as he entered, the ceramic warm against his skin. "They'll come again," she said, her voice low, tattoos shifting like living vines under her rolled sleeves. "But look at this!" She gestured to the window, where Marcus and Elias directed a team hauling beams, the wood groaning under ropes as it slotted into place. The addition was taking shape, a sturdy annex with wide eaves for shade. a communal hearth sketched in the plans, a fortress disguised as welcome. Harlan nodded, his gaze drifting to his son's photo, the young soldier's eyes seeming to approve from their framed vigil. "Reminds me of his letters," he murmured, throat tight. "Dreams of a place where the lost could find roots." The morning unfolded in a rhythm of purpose, hammers resuming their chorus as the sun climbed, baking the earth into a shimmering haze. Riders from the allied packs integrated seamlessly. Sophia, with her quick laugh and nimble hands, wiring lights that would banish future night's darkness. Elias overseeing the foundation, his grizzled commands laced with the wisdom of roads that had tested him. Stories wove through the labor, Jax sharing a tale of a desert promise to a fallen viper, sworn over a campfire much like this one, to shield the vulnerable from faceless powers. "We ride for the forgotten," he said during a water break, passing a canteen to Harlan, the cool metal slick with condensation. The old man's hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the surge of belonging, a family chosen in the crucible of crisis, echoing the loyalty his boy had embodied in uniform. Yet beneath the camaraderie, doubt flickered. Harlan wondered if his quiet acts of bread and solace could truly anchor such a storm. By noon, the heat pressed down like an unseen hand, mirages dancing on the highway's edge when the air split with the wail of sirens, a harbinger slicing through the construction din. Dust billowed as a convoy of county vehicles barreled up the drive, 3 squad cars, an armored transport, and the sleek SUV from the night before. Led by the same blustering official, his face twisted in righteous fury. Deputies spilled out, hands hovering near holsters, their boots kicking up gravel that stung like accusations. The leader clutched a megaphone, his voice booming over the sudden hush. "This operation is shut down. Warrants for trespass, obstruction. Evacuate now, or be removed by force." Floodlights snapped on despite the daylight, harsh beams pinning the riders in place, turning sweat-slicked faces into masks of defiance. The vipers didn't scatter, they coalesced. Jax mounted the porch steps in 2 strides, his crew fanning out, Marcus planting his hammer like a stake in the ground, prosthetic leg unyielding, Lena herding Mia and Clara inside, the bakery door clicking shut like a vow sealed. Elias and Sophia flanked Jax, their postures a silent testament to battles where authority had crumbled under truth's weight. Harlan stepped forward, apron discarded, his frame straight as the beams they'd raised. "This is my land, earned through years of honest toil," he called, voice carrying clear over the tension, the scent of sun-warmed stone mingling with the acrid tang of exhaust. The leader sneered, waving a sheaf of papers that fluttered like trapped birds. "Honest? You're harboring outlaws, building without permits. This ends today. Demolition crews inbound." Murmurs rippled through the deputies, some shifting uneasily as locals began to arrive. Trailer park residents drawn by the sirens, a cluster of veterans from the highway diner, even the nurse from the nearby clinic who'd sampled Harlan's bread during night shifts. They formed a human barrier, faces etched with quiet outrage, hands clutching petitions scrawled in haste. "He's fed us all," one woman called, her voice cracking with conviction. "Through storms and lean times, no questions." Jax seized the moment, his tone measured thunder. "You chase progress. But what you build is hollow. We've got evidence, years of Harlan's generosity, witnesses to your strong-arm tactics. This ain't law, it's theft wrapped in badges." He nodded to Sophia, who held aloft a tablet streaming live footage to online networks, the screen's glow capturing the standoff for eyes far beyond the desert. The leader's bluster faltered, color-draining, as radios crackled with urgent chatter from higher up, reports of media inquiries swelling public outcry. A deputy lowered his hand from his holster, glancing at his partner, the weight of moral fracture evident in his averted eyes. Harlan's heart pounded, the bakery at his back a living pulse of promises kept. To his wife, buried under the plot out front. To his son, whose unfulfilled dreams now rose in timber and stone. To these riders, who repaid kindness with unyielding shields. The official barked orders, but they rang hollow. The convoy hesitating as the crowd thickened, voices rising in a chorus of support. Finally, with a curse swallowed by the wind, he signaled retreat, vehicles peeling away in a rooster tail of dust, sirens fading into impotent echoes. Relief washed over the sight like cooling rain, cheers erupting as tools lifted once more, the work surging with triumphant energy. Harlan sank onto a crate, Clara pressing a damp cloth to his brow, Mia peeking from the door with a shy grin. Jax knelt before him, eyes fierce with the fire of victory, hard won. "That was the line they crossed," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Now we fortify, not just walls, but the story. Your bread started a chain. This haven will end their greed." As the afternoon waned, the crew toiled under the relentless sun, laughter punctuating the strain, bonds forged in the heat of confrontation. Yet in the quiet moments, Harlan glimpsed the cost, the deepening lines on Jax's face, the subtle limp in Marcus's step, reminders that redemption demanded sacrifice. Dusk approached, painting the sky in fiery strokes, the rumble of distant engines hinting at reinforcements for both sides, where the true test of honor loomed, unbreakable as the dawn. The dusk bled into night like ink on parchment, the desert sky a canvas of bruised indigo streaked with the last embers of sunset. As the rumble of engines swelled into a deafening chorus that shook the bakery's foundations, Harlan stood frozen on the porch, the rough-hewn rail digging into his palms, the faint scent of cooling mortar clinging to his skin like a second layer of resolve. The air hummed with anticipation, thick with the tang of exhaust and sagebrush as headlights crested the horizon, not a scattered few, but a phalanx county rigs reinforced with construction haulers, their yellow beams slicing through the gathering dark like accusatory fingers. The iron vipers and their allies stirred from the day's labors, shadows coalescing into a line of leather and steel. Jax at the forefront, his silhouette unyielding against the encroaching glare. Inside, the bakery's lamplight flickered like a heartbeat, casting warm pools across the counter where Clara clutched Mia close, the child's wide eyes reflecting the chaos beyond the window. Lena moved with quiet efficiency, barring the door and whispering assurances, her tattoos a map of battles won through grit rather than guns. Marcus leaned on his hammer nearby, the prosthetic leg planted firm in the gravel, his breath steady despite the storm brewing. Harlan's gaze lingered on his son's photo, one final time, the young soldier's promise echoing in his mind. A place of refuge, built not for glory, but for the weary souls the world forgot. He'd kept that vow in loaves left at dawn, in silent acts that fed more than hunger. Now, as the convoy halted with a grind of brakes, dust swirling like vengeful spirits, Harlan stepped into the fray, his voice cutting through the din. "This ends with honor, not hammers." The county leader emerged from the lead vehicle, his face a mask of contrived authority under the floodlights, flanked by a dozen deputies in riot gear, their visors glinting coldly. Behind them, bulldozers idled, engines growling low threats, the air heavy with diesel and desperation. "Last chance!" the man bellowed through a bullhorn, his words amplified into the night. "Demolition commences at first light. Your squatter's paradise falls. Evacuate, or we'll clear you ourselves." The riders didn't flinch. Jax raised a hand, silencing the low murmurs from his crew, Elias and Sophia at his sides. Their faces etched with the quiet fire of those who'd stared down worse dawns. 40 strong now, they formed an unbreakable cordon around the half-risen walls, bikes parked like sentinels, chrome catching the artificial glow. Harlan moved forward, his steps measured, the gravel crunching under boots worn thin by years of solitary stands. "You've chased shadows," he said, voice steady as the oven's hum, carrying over the tension. "But this land's legacy isn't yours to bury. It's baked into every loaf shared, every promise kept for the lost." The leader laughed, a hollow bark that echoed off the sagebrush, waving final orders, papers stamped with seals that meant nothing against the tide of truth. Deputies advanced, batons at the ready, the scent of oiled leather clashing with the sharp bite of authority's facade. Jax met them halfway, his presence a wall of calm thunder. "We've got no fight with you boys," he called, eyes locking on the nearest. "But cross this line, and you'll answer to more than badges, to the folks you've overlooked, the oaths you've broken." The standoff teetered on a knife's edge, the night air electric with unspoken reckonings. Radios crackled from the county rigs, urgent voices spilling reports of swelling crowds. Locals from the trailer park, veterans rolling in on battered trucks, even a caravan of highway wanderers drawn by the live streams Sophia had ignited hours before. They arrived in waves, headlights joining the fray, forming a human sea that lapped at the edges of the site. A nurse from the clinic stepped forward, her scrubs dusted with road grit, holding a bundle of letters, testimonies from those Harlan had fed through lean winters, quiet acts that had mended more than empty stomachs. "He's the heart of this stretch," she declared, her voice rising above the murmurs. "Your progress starves the soul." "No." The leader's composure cracked, sweat tracing lines down his temple as the floodlights wavered, caught in the tide of faces, families, outcasts, kin forged in crisis. One deputy lowered his baton, glancing at his partner, the weight of complicity heavy in his stance. Elias spoke then, his grizzled tone weaving through the crowd like smoke. "We rode wars where paper meant death. But here, loyalty outlasts it all." Jax nodded to Harlan, who pulled a worn envelope from his pocket, his son's last letter, read aloud in the firelight earlier, promising a haven for the road-bound. The words hung in the air, a bridge from past to present, stirring something in the deputies' ranks. Radios erupted in chaos, higher commands filtering through. Media vans on the approach, public outrage boiling over, the casino scheme unraveling under scrutiny. Faced with the unbreakable front, the leader barked a retreat, his megaphone falling silent as the convoy reversed, taillights bleeding red into the black. Cheers rose like a desert wind, raw and triumphant, as the crowd surged forward, not to destroy, but to build. Tools lifted once more under the stars, the addition's walls climbing higher by lantern and moonlight, a symphony of hammers sealing the night's victory. Harlan watched, chest tight with release, as Clara and Mia joined the circle, passing water and remnants of bread, the scent of yeast a balm against the adrenaline's fade. Jax clapped his shoulder, the gesture firm as rebar. "Your vow lit the spark. We fanned it into this." By false dawn, the structure stood complete. A sturdy annex with wide doors flung open, the communal hearth crackling to life, inviting the weary in. Riders and locals mingled, stories flowing like the coffee Clara brewed, bonds woven tighter than the timber frame. Harlan sank onto the porch steps, the first light touching his face, warming the lines of grief long etched there. His son's photo, now joined by snapshots of the crew, Jax's scarred grin, Lena's fierce gaze, Marcus's steady stance, hung above the counter, a gallery of chosen family. The bakery pulsed with life, no longer a solitary beacon, but a stronghold of redemption, where promises outlasted corruption, loyalty triumphed over greed. As the sun crested fully, gilding the new haven in gold, Harlan broke bread with his newfound kin, the crust cracking under shared teeth. In that moment, the weight of loss lifted, replaced by the quiet honor of legacies rebuilt. The road stretched endless before them, but here, in the dust and dawn, they'd forged something eternal, a testament that silent acts of kindness, repaid in unyielding alliance, could reshape worlds. The engines idled softly now, ready for whatever shadows lingered, but the light they'd kindled burned brighter, a promise kept against the horizon's call.